Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy and I'm back again with Dr. Ebun Joseph. We got disconnected the other day, so thanks for joining me again, Ebun.
Thank you.
We were talking about race and how being in a Black body can make people feel very unsafe around white people because of how we behave, the things we say, the things we do. One of the issues I really wanted to discuss is asylum in Ireland and how people come from Africa and other places seeking refuge in this country, and then they end up in the direct provision system. Ebun, do you think this system is fit for a purpose, or does something need to change?
I think that the way to look at it is to just, get a picture of what is really happening. People in their own homes are saying, we're afraid, we're dying, we're going to be killed, or, we're looking for safety. We are looking for a safe place. And then they come into a place that they think is going to be a safe place for them. And many of them are again incarcerated for 5, 6, 7. I know people who've been in that system for 14 years. There's a young man and he's in a relationship with a girl. I've known this couple for about 6 years now, and I've known them together. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like it's a one-day relationship. I've known the girl for 6 years. She's a white Irish girl, and she's been in a relationship with only this person for the past 6 years, and he has a deportation order on him. 14 years he has lived in this country. Where do you want to send a person like that to? Do you understand? So really the way to look at it is that people have come to you. It's like a child. Somebody comes to you and say, help me, help me, help me, I'm in trouble. Then you take that person and then you put the person into a worse trouble. We incarcerate people. Look at how we are all suffering from just the little lockdown of COVID-19 since March. Look at many of us are doing like weird things, God, I don't even want to tell you some of the weird things I'm doing. My hair, I cut my hair during COVID-19. I went natural.
You think was it the pandemic that prompted you? You think?
It was just everything, your values in life suddenly change, you're living with yourself, look at all of the things, I've lived how many years now? It has to have had a part to play.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so look at what that isolation, and it's not even 100% isolation, but that little piece of isolation, what it has done to us, that we can't travel, we need permission to travel. People are on the street protesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But people are permanently, they don't even have the power to protest. We need to understand how disempowering it is, that it strips you of your own humanity. And when we talk of that struggle, the struggle is like, they continue, they're caught in that struggle. It is, I don't know, it's the most horrible thing, that where somebody has to, the person tells you when to wake up, when to eat, how you can eat, what you can eat, where your kids can go to school, who stays in the same room with you. Do you know how much power is gone from you? Your human agency is gone.
Yes.
And so people come out from that after 8 years or 14 years or 10 years, you slip them a piece of paper and you say, here, go out. Go out to what? You've turned me into a zombie. You've turned me into a person who can't think for myself anymore. So it is I just think that we need to see it from that perspective, and we can do more. We can do more. I know some people will read it now and say, oh yeah, then let them go back to their country. They've come away from there saying we need safety. We need you to help us, and we call ourselves, that's the name we call ourselves here in Ireland. We call ourselves humanitarian, we call ourselves, equal, we call ourselves fair. Then we should live by, we should act our name, We can't be doing one thing and expecting people to call us that and then go out there to act in a different way. No, it's inhumane and it's not okay. We're creating, because experiences impact on people's identities. And we talked about that, before we got cut off, that the experiences that people have, it impacts on their identities, it impacts on who they are becoming. You hear some of the young kids saying that when they are going home, they go past their home because, they are working with their schoolmates and they don't want their schoolmates to know that's the hostel you're coming out from. It's just, we just need to think about all of those things.
One of the things as well, I think, about COVID-19 that people have found so difficult is the lack of control. You know, as you say, we don't have control over anything. We don't know, we didn't have control over whether the schools would open, whether we'd lose our jobs, you know, any of that, whether people that we love get infected or whatever. A lot of people in the direct provision centres have also been exposed to the virus, and it's in a way unsurprising given the close confines, the prison-like conditions that people have to live in. But Ebun, do you think the actual system is in a sense an institutionally racist system? I ask you this because it's been said to me before by people in the human rights field, and indeed I was in Geneva before the UN Convention Against Torture hearing in 2011, where the head of the Department of Justice, the senior civil servant, described our asylum system as a legal racket that he wanted to smash. Basically, that people were coming to this country on dubious grounds and saying, you know, I'm from wherever in Africa, I need asylum. And he said to the commission, or the committee pretty much, we do not get legitimate asylum seekers in this country. I've heard other civil servants say this. Surely that is unsustainable as a position, given the amount of kind of humanitarian crises in various countries, not just in parts of Africa, but, you know, other political instability. The world seems to be kind of a bit crazy right now. You know, America is very unstable. But does that suggest that we have a problem in the system itself, again, that has certain attitudes to people from certain places and the stories that they have to tell about their experiences?
And that's why sometimes we fight against history, you know, the way history is told and the way history is, you know, if the narrative is wrong. So this goes back to the narrative that they have about people, about, you know, the African continent. You automatically don't believe them. Even when they have a gun to their head, you automatically don't believe them. So whatever is being said now, for me, is it's still a confirmation of that historical positioning that you don't believe them. So where they are guilty of lying until proven innocent. So where the reverse is the case, rather than guilty until or innocent until proven guilty, this group of people are actually treated as if you are guilty of lying, guilty of being dubious. What was his name? Called it bogus asylum claims. You know, people have died in that system. How does something must be chasing people for them to leave their countries and come and be incarcerated in another system? Something worse must be chasing them. And for me, that's why I think that, you know, the way we treat people who are seeking asylum in Ireland is a crisis, is a care crisis. If we cared enough, we will understand that no human being willingly, you understand, just uproots themselves from their families, from their contacts, from who they know, to come into a system to be incarcerated. So we look at all of these things, that there are racist ideas and racist policies. If you look at the total numbers of people coming to seek asylum in Ireland, they are less than how many thousand? Well, we're talking of what, 10,000, 20,000 in the last how many years? When we had the ascension states, when we had the opening, the total number of Eastern Europeans who came to Ireland was over 200,000. We received those people. We received them. And we are only talking about less than 10%. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it is the value that we place on human lives. These people left their countries, you know, no wars, nothing. They just said, no, you know what, we choose, we prefer to come to Ireland. Over 200,000 were taken into Ireland between 2000 and when the Ascension States opened. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
And we're talking of only less than 10% of this number of people. And we cannot allow them to live in Ireland. And they are not saying we want to live here free. They are saying we want to stay here, we want to work, we want to contribute. We've come with skills. That's the way for me, that's the way I look at it. I equate it. So we're saying that there are acceptable groups of people and they are non-acceptable. And this group of people, based on their skin color, based on them coming from outside the European Union, we have decided you are the unacceptable people. And we will put as many blocks in your way around this fortress Europe that we have created to keep you out. And because that is our desire, we will come up with every kind of policy, every kind of idea, and every kind of racist story to make sure that we enact that space that we want. So the policies will keep changing, the ideas will keep changing to make sure that Fortress Europe that we have created continues to remain that and keeps out people who we have decided are undesirable.
We spoke, Ebun, as well about trauma the other day. And it strikes me that the legal system has fundamentally no clue about what trauma is and how traumatic memory works. It demands from an asylum seeker a very clear, linear narrative where there's no contradictions, where there's no forgetting of facts, you know. It expects complete kind of photographic memory of very traumatic events. And when then I say something or I forget what I've previously said, that again is confirmation of my dodginess, you know, that I can't be trusted. Do you think, aside from obviously whole-scale training about racism and the history of imperialism and all that's done to us, do you think lawyers and policymakers need a bit of training about trauma and how we can't expect the same type of stories from people, or just that they get emotional, you know, and they break down, or they're not emotional enough, you know? You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, it seems to me.
Exactly.
You know, if you're too emotional, you're not believable. If you're like a wooden plank, you're not believable either. So do we need training about that as well?
We need a whole lot of training. I think there was one I was reading online. It was just, I mean, if it was not so sad, it would have been funny. I think the department actually told this person that the person did not look gay or did not act, you know, to be gay. Like, I'm like, okay, so what is it supposed to act like? Like, you know, please tell us, can you say a little bit more about the stereotypes you expect him or her, you know, to exhibit? You know, how do you say, oh, you don't look gay? Do you know what I mean? Like, you know.
Yes. But there is no winning
like that.
Yeah, there's no winning with those attitudes and that ignorance.
Winning.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, no, definitely they need everything. I mean, like, we forget the fact that when people get, when people's progression, you know, in careers, we look at that when people, their development stops, when they are hit with trauma, their development stops. So you can actually see an 18-year-old who is actually only 12 because the trauma happened to them at the age of 12, you know, and so their development stops, their thinking stops, their processing stops, and it has a massive psychological impact, you know, and so sometimes we don't see all of those things, you know, and so, you know, so even like when I work with people, I have to look at it and look at, you know, what is this person's, you know, psychological age. You have to look at that. You know, and so as service providers, particularly frontline service providers, we need to be taught all those things. And I keep going back to it. I don't even blame the officials. I blame our education system. I think that our education system needs a full overhaul. It is not fully equipping us to deal with humans. As a doctor, an engineer, a guard, a psychologist, a teacher, you're going to be working with human beings. I cannot just teach you the subject you're going to teach, because you're not teaching the subjects to blocks and sticks and stones. You're teaching it to living, blood gushing human beings. And so you need to understand how humans behave, how humans think, what happens to them, you know, the different psychological, sociological, societal things around them. You need to understand different types of groups, you know, and it's just I think it's a lack of will, you know, that is not there, you know, and so yes, you know, our officials have to be trained, you know, in the short term, but in the long term is that our whole education system needs a massive overhaul. We need to, and it's not going to take so much to just make sure that everyone going through our education system gets to understand society, gets to understand humans. You know, one or two modules there, you put all of those things in that runs across, you know, and so it becomes a core part, you know, so for the short term, yes, you know, our officials, you know, in services like the asylum process, the INIS, they have to, get involved, they have to take all this training from anti-racism to how to deal with difference, how to manage difference, but also to understand the impact, the psychological impact, of those traumatic experiences on people, the impact of being doubted, you're intimidated.
Yes.
When you're standing there, you're being doubted, how many things are you going to remember? It's like now, I'm so busy now, like the things I did yesterday, don't ask me about them, because once I'm done yesterday, it just goes. It's like I compartmentalized my thinking, So once I'm done with it drops off so that I can create space in my head for the things I have to do today or tomorrow.
I get you. Let's talk a little bit now about employment, which is also related to direct provision, because people up until very recently, if you were in the asylum system, you couldn't work. Now, thankfully, they liberalized the rules a little bit, but I'm sure most people who are 5 years in the system still find it very difficult to find any kind of work, and it's only in certain type of opportunities for them. Can you tell me about your book, Ebun, that you recently wrote, which is called Critical Race Theory and Inequality in the Labour Market, Racial Stratification in Ireland? What prompted you to write the book?
But that book is really about, I used critical race theory and a stratification framework to present the socioeconomic outcomes and the inequality in the labor market. I wanted people to be able to see how inequality impacts on people. What are the sources of, inequality in the labor market? How does racial inequality impact? How does it generate? I was working in an organization and we observed, as a career development consultant, I observed that, depending on the nationality of descent of my clients, the people I was working with, it took us a longer time. So if they were Eastern Europeans, it took us maybe like 6 to 9 months, 13 months to help them find employment. If it was a Western European, depending on what country, some of them within 2 weeks, we've helped them to access the labor market to get a job. If they were, so Western Europeans took between, 3 to 6 months. Eastern Europeans took between, 9 to about 12, 13 months. But our African clients, our clients of African descent, was taking an average of 2 years for us to help them navigate the labor market. I'm saying even unpaid work. I'm not saying paid work now, I'm saying unpaid work. So we noticed, when I did an analysis, it just showed up that, a lot of the people that were navigating the labor market, most of them were having to go down. So they have like a level 8, a level 9 qualification, but for them to get paid work, they had to go down and study a level 5 course so that they can get a job, on a level 5 level. So probably something like care assistant or even cleaning, and these are people who had a degree already, who had a master's degree, coming into Ireland. Some of them had retrained in Ireland. So I wanted to understand why. I wanted to be able to articulate that, and so that people don't just tell me, oh, that's a subjective view. I was like, okay, there must be something, the reason we're able to reproduce this among this group, and that was why, because, and those are key questions I ask in the book. If we say it's immigration, if it's immigration, then every immigrant coming into Ireland with a degree, would have their labor market process going down first, and then, but it wasn't the same for every person who was of migrant descent. It was, specific nationalities, and so that was really what I wanted to do about the book. And I wanted to understand why, to be able to articulate it, and then come up with ideas and solutions. What do employers need to know? What do even people who are suffering through this process, what do they need to know? Because sometimes when you look at your marginality, you think that you're the only one in it. And so you really feel shame, you feel embarrassed, you feel really bad, you're down, because it feels like you're the only one in it. But when you see, the way we say misery likes company,
It does.
So when you see that, okay, I'm actually not the only one, then there must be something within the system. You then don't, you don't internalize all that shame by yourself, so it's like it's a shared problem, So yeah, those are the key things I wanted to address in the book.
And then, Ebun, who is it for? Is it for academics like yourself, or employers, or for people of African descent to better understand their situation? Or is it for policymakers, or kind of could anyone benefit from reading this, and kind of HR people and say, well, what are these things that we need to do? Because, for example, after Black Lives Matter kind of the movement made its way over here, the Department of Justice set up the Committee on Anti-Racism. It didn't bother to do this before. It was clearly, okay, we need to respond to this issue. Do you think now HR departments in the likes of Google, in the public sector, you know, everywhere pretty much, and everywhere in between, I know we're entering a recession as well, but that people can't just kind of say, this doesn't apply to me, you know, anymore.
No.
We all have a role to play, do we not? If we're in power positions where we're hiring people, that we've got to actually face these issues and kind of say we need to diversify our workplace.
Absolutely. And the good thing about the book is that, you know, I wrote the book the same way I talk. You know, I talk simple. Right. I don't use big jargonic words that you need a dictionary to understand, you know. No, I write. So the book is written in such a way that it is very simple, very practical examples that you can see. So it is accessible. So there are chapters that are accessible for researchers. Mm-hmm. So somebody who wants to research and understand critical race theory, who wants to research race, I provide the whole mind map, you know, so that you can see that it's not just experiences, there's identity. So I actually show you that if you want to do a full research on race, these are the core areas that you need to cover. So I provide that for researchers. I provide a method to carry out race, you know, critical race theory research. Mm-hmm. I even talk about how to ask questions. You know, the way you ask a question, you say, have you ever experienced racism? I say, I don't ask those kind of questions.
Okay.
I don't ask those kind of questions. Have you ever experienced? No, I ask you, have you ever wanted to leave your job? Why? Okay. You see, there are two different questions. So the way critical race theory asks a question, it doesn't lead you. It asks you in such a way that it draws, you know, from the depth, you know. So if I ask you, have you ever wanted to leave your job? You know, you will go into all those places. And that was what happened, you know, in the data that I used in the book. Those were the kind of questions I asked, you know. Are there bits of yourself you don't show? You know, when you go to work, do you show all of yourself when you're in work? Do you know what bits of you are you comfortable showing? What bits of yourself are you uncomfortable showing? You know, so I talk, you know, so I reach out to people who are researching so that they can not just produce Eurocentric data. But in addition to that, I have 5 core chapters that are fantastic for anyone who is in the industry, who is an employer, who is a diversity and inclusion person or HR person, you know, and even if you're a victim of racism, you can read it, because I talk about how the experiences, but I also talk about how the experiences reconstruct identities. Sure. You know, I talk about the default positioning, how racial stratification brings us to a default position every point in time, you know, and how people have to work 1, 2, 3, 4 times harder to be able to get the same kind of job. I talk about implicit bias, you know, but one thing that I do, which you don't find in a lot of places, I talk about the fear of triggering implicit bias, which people of migrant descent, people who are marginalized, you know, they have, you know, because you're so sure that, you know, they are going to be racist or they are going to have a bias against you. That fear of triggering the bias, you know, then you end up trying, you know, to not converse or not to engage. You then end up performing the same bias you're trying to protect yourself from triggering. You know, so I write about that, you know. So yes, a lot of things. So for both end users, but also for employers and diversity and inclusion people to actually get key things, you know. So it's not just enough, you know, to say, oh, I'm D&I. What does that mean? What training do you have? You know? Yeah, so, you know, so it don't just be that, you know, be trained. And I think it's a fantastic, you know, particularly the last 4 chapters are really, really key, you know, to help people understand how to work with difference, how to manage difference in the workplace. And then
I guess how to create a safe environment for people who have different backgrounds, because that's the thing about implicit bias and the microaggressions, aside from the really, really ugly overt racism that no one can ignore, but just the draining people or the snide comments or things like that. I mean, that's a bigger task, I presume, for employers to manage over time. But have you kind of any tips for employers? Or in the event that I joined a few weeks ago, I think you were saying, you know, if you have no people of African descent in your organization, hire one. Now, for the one who might be hired, it might still be difficult because they're the only one, and it's always nicer if there is more diversity or more people like yourselves or myself in an organization. But we have to start somewhere, I guess, and hiring one is the way to start. Can you say a little bit more about that, Ebun?
Absolutely. Well, I started this campaign where I'm encouraging businesses and organizations to sign up, to add one. So it's called the Add One campaign. So we're saying if you don't have a Black person in your team, in your organization, so add one. Mm-hmm. And then somebody says, I have one, they will say, add one more. Yeah. So it's the add one, add yes. one more. Yes. So it's the Add One campaign, add one more. So if you have one, please add one more. Yeah. But if you sign up for the campaign, we're not just saying you should add one. We're saying that before you add one, you need to do something in your organization. So bring somebody, either like myself, there are a lot of people who are out there now who can speak, to come in to speak to the organization, to sensitize them about how to work with difference. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't do that and you add one, you're only bringing that Black person or that Asian person or that Indian person, you're the traveler person, you're only bringing them into a harmful situation. Mm-hmm. So when we come in, we do a session, to sensitize the organization so that they can become aware, of how their preferences, how their taste, produces of discrimination against these people, So that is, so if you sign up for the Add One, before you add one, you need to have done this to sensitize, the organization. But in addition to adding one and that, we also say that, you should then make sure you have a sponsor for the one you have added. Mm-hmm. So we're giving you like a 5-step thing, for an organization to do if you're part of the campaign. So when you add one, you make sure that you assign a sponsor for that one. So that means they build the relationship with that person, and then they look at, their progression, their ability to navigate that process. Because it's not just, we find things like, in organizations, you look at the pipeline, you look at people who are employed in the same year, you want to look at, the growth. You see that, certain people from certain nationalities, don't progress as much as the others, So how do we, so it's again, making sure that we mitigate against things like that, mm-hmm. That they don't have, strong relationships or bonds within the organization. So they are constantly on the outside. So the sponsor, helps to do all of that within the organization. So really, it's about, things like that to just make sure that, we, and the key, and I think the key thing we're trying to look at is we're saying, because these figures in our census statistics, from our census of 2016, the unemployment rate of Black Africans in Ireland is between 43 and 63%, in an Ireland where our unemployment rate pre-COVID-19 was 5.4% thereabout. All right. So we're saying that by 2021, and it's just around the corner, we're saying by the next census statistics, what can you and I do if we all added one? Yes. If Google, so Google, as big as you are, you can't just add one. That means that you will say every department, so both marketing, both operations, both IT. So if all the departments in Google or of AIB or, if all the departments added one, so by 2021, that's it. And it's so simple, so easily achievable. Yes. You don't even need to make a whole big plan or anything. Just use, this is your response to Black Lives Matter. Don't put Black Lives Matter on your website and all of those things. That has not helped anybody. It's not going to help my community. It's not going to help me. Give them jobs. Yes. Look for people. Promote your security man who's been there, your security for 10 years, and he has a master's degree, and he could be in an administrative role. Promote him. Go and look at, look at that pipeline. Look at people you've underemployed. because that's one of the big problems we find with people who are Black in Ireland, people of the African descent living in Ireland, you know, and even when their education is here, for me, that is the one that is most difficult, that they've been trained here, they were educated here. I'm not saying people who brought education from outside of Ireland, from here, they are still experiencing the same thing. They are underemployed. Their mates have grown and they are still underemployed. So look at all of those things and, you know, move them on. Find, you know, if you're an employer for somebody and you've underemployed them, look at them and see ways to help them move up, you know, in the ladder, you know. And I think one last thing is just to say, and I know because we started this question by looking at, you know, people who are seeking asylum here in Ireland and, you know, them getting employment. And I'm saying, you know, the key thing is, and most times when I'm looking at labor market, I focus even on people who have the right to live and work in Ireland. Because when you talk about people seeking asylum, they come up with stories. Oh, you know, they don't have qualifications. Oh, you know, they don't have leave to remain. So I don't even go down that route. I give you, you know, people who have the right to live, who are citizens. And I show you that we have a bigger problem. And if people who are citizens in Ireland are underemployed, so imagine what will be happening with people who are seeking asylum in Ireland, who, you know, employers cannot be bothered to see that, you know, they've been given a kind of permit that allows them to work in Ireland. You know, so yeah, you know,
it's very grim when you put it that way, Ebun, all right, because for those who believe that our system is just so, you know, attractive to people who have nefarious motives, you know, clearly no person in their right mind really would risk 6 years in direct provision to then be either on the dole or forevermore or in poor employment when they're capable of so much more. So again, it really just highlights the ugliness, I think, of systemic racism there and the inability to give the opportunities. So that Add One campaign is really simple, clear ask for employers. To conclude, because I could spend hours with you, I know you're a woman with an amazing mission and so many interesting things to say. This whole series is about the policy making process and, you know, using the voices and the experience that we have to push for change in particular areas. Do you engage yourself actively with the policy making process, Ebun?
You know, we work within our circle of influence. So the way I look at my work is that if I can disrupt a little and influence those who are, you know, who are making the policy. So I influence you, you go and then, you know, influence the people who are making. I don't know how to play politics. I don't know how to try and be nice to people too. You know, all of those kind of things, you know. Yeah, you know, so if it ain't good, I just tell you, actually, no, this, you know, I won't say the word, but I tell you as it is. You know, so what I try to do is if I can influence those who who have the power, and then it goes up. So if I can disrupt it a little bit, you know, yes, you know, and all of those things. So I'm using my platform in every possible way that I can, every little platform I have. Like when we had COVID-19, I ran 4 webinars, you know, to just try and add to the conversation to make sure that we were not just going one way and forgetting those who were being left behind. You know, when we had the Black Lives Matter as well, I had webinars and it was really well attended, you know, talked about, you know, being an anti-racist. So in that way, a lot of, you know, diversity and inclusion, people who influence the policies in their organizations, a lot of CEOs attended, you know, so for me, in that way, I influence policy.
That makes sense to me that you're using your influence through various social media platforms and raising awareness and having very powerful discussions. But what do you believe are the most urgent race-related priorities for the current government to address in the short and medium term?
I think short, medium term, I will start with education. If we want to start with anything, the Department of Education needs to take a strong stand and they need to do something. We need to make sure that the knowledge of Africa and Africans is taught in all our schools. There are a lot of campaigns. I've got so many people who've emailed me to be part of their campaign. I'm like, guys, you just keep going. We're all doing, the same thing on different platforms. So the more voices we have, the better. So we need the Department of Education to take a strong stand on the knowledge of Africa being taught, the history of Africa to be taught in our schools from primary school to secondary and to university. And that means that all universities must have a Black Studies module, must have an Africana Studies or Black Studies module, in there. And it cannot be Eurocentric. It cannot be taught by someone who, is going to teach you about why Africa is the poorest continent in the world. It cannot be taught by people who think like that. Mm-hmm. It has to be, because when I say that it has to be taught by someone who is of African descent, they're like, but I'm like, okay, so the way to look at it is, we've had Black Lives Matter movement. Any lecturer, any academic, any scholar who did not publicly say anything during this Black Lives Matter should not be given a platform to teach Black studies or Africana studies, because we are just a paycheck to that person. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Because if you were not part of our struggle, if you were not part of that struggle, we are just a paycheck to you. Mm. And so if we're just a paycheck to you, you should not be teaching, this should not be what it is. So policy starting from education. So the Department of Education needs to set up to make sure that the knowledge of Africa is taught in a non-Eurocentric way. We call it the Black perspective. Mm-hmm. It is not to erase the white perspective. It is to complement it, because we've only talked about, the civil rights movement and all of those things, but we've not talked about the Africa that existed before enslavement. Mm-hmm. We've not talked about even the efforts that are being made by Africa. We've not talked about all of those efforts, and it is not in, so we need an education system, that covers all of those things, effectively. Mm-hmm. So that's one. So starting from education. In addition to that, for education, I'm even saying that all universities should have a compulsory module, that addresses how we manage difference. Yes. And so it should be a module that covers everything from anti-racism, how to become an anti-racist, how to work with, the traveler group, how to work with, people of different religious backgrounds, people of different sexual orientations, different genders, so a comprehensive module that is done, maybe that is fed in by all the different, these key schools like, gender, race, to build a module together that at the end of it, every student has a full understanding, of society and people in society. So an anti-racism module should be a core part of all, undergraduate training that we have, So yeah, so for me, those are just key, urgent. I think for me, they're urgent. They can't wait. They cannot wait. If you look at in Ireland, we don't even have a Center of African Studies. Okay. It's wrong. So I have just set up the Institute of Anti-Racism and Black Studies. So we need things like that. Where people can do research. And that we're not just borrowing, from other people, and that we're not just, being led by others. So for me, that is one key aspect, that we want to look at. Policy, again, is, direct provision. God, that thing is going to come and bite us, it's going to come and bite us, in the next few years. We need to just do something about it now. We're talking about it. Let's stop talking. Let's just act, and I think we need to understand that it's the lack of will. Look at COVID-19. When COVID-19 came, we needed to act. We acted, boom, like the drop of the hat. We shut down everything. We gave the extra monies if we needed to give it. We did everything we needed to do.
We acted together as well. We unified as humankind, really, to prevent the threat to all of us. And that's because there was an outside threat. It wasn't coming, well, I mean, it was in the sense that we all pose a danger, I guess, to one another, but still we came together to fight the common issue. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Just going back to one thing, when we were speaking the other day and you were talking about teaching your own class and asking people, you know, what's good about Africa, or tell me something positive about being Black. I mean, that goes right back to the early years in school, for sure, that people are taught positive narratives about, as well, the collective and the importance of family and the group, you know. And what I've learned again about trauma is that so many of the things that heal are actually very elevated in African and indigenous culture, you know, the power of the collective. So we have individual wounds, but require actually often collective healing and to be held within the group. But possibly that people from you know, from Africa aren't even aware themselves of these healing qualities because of the Western narrative that they're not to be elevated. So is that part of the courses that you see as important to the African studies in schools and all of that too?
Yeah, I mean, like a key thing, I mean, like we talk about Ubuntu.
Yes.
You know, I am because you are, you know, and people ask me, why do I keep doing all of this? Oh, you're okay, you got a job and you got all of that. I said, but if my brother is not okay, if people who look like me are not okay, then I'm not okay, because when I'm walking on the street one day, or when my kids are walking on the street one day, they're not good. When I'm on the street, nobody's going to say, oh, that's Dr. Ebun. No, I'm not Dr. Ebun. I'm just another Black girl, you know? And so we need to make sure that the way that, you know, Black girls are seen, or the way that Black boys are seen, or people who are Black are seen, you know, that, you know, they are seen in a way that is, you know, edifying to their humanity. So we're all involved in that struggle. You will see that, you know, recently, the NBA, you know, the Lakers and all of them, you know, in the United States, they boycotted a game. You know, the boys they're all fine. They're all multimillionaires. They're fine. But they realize that, you know, I'm fine, yes, but what about the person who looks like me? He's not fine. What about my two daughters or my two sons? They are not fine. You know, and so that's you know, it comes, you know, that Ubuntu, you know, that it comes from all of that, you know. And that we go back to all of those things, you know, we go back to all of those kind of spaces, and we can teach them, you know.
Yes, because white people need that too, actually, you know, to be felt and seen. And okay, we have traditionally occupied more powerful positions, but we too have been disconnected from the value of community and the power of the collective, I think. And
look, if you look at COVID, what happened in COVID? We went back to community.
Yeah.
We went back to what was important. We went back to, you know, going to your neighbor and checking on your neighbor and make sure they had their groceries. My neighbor was giving me pancakes or things like that, you know, we went back to caring, you know, about, we began to know the people on our streets, and we were saying, check on your old neighbor if you've not seen them for a bit, you know, and all people who were older were just getting groceries being dropped on their door, people who had COVID, who couldn't go out for 14 days, or who were who were just, you know, staying on their own in isolation. You know, they were getting stuff being delivered to them. We went back to community. And that's something that we have left. And that is a massive African culture. Yeah. And for me, that is one of, if there's anything I miss, you know, from being here, not being back home in Nigeria, is that, you know, like, you know, that, you know, that community where you have a community of people around you. And so that even the things that will depress you don't depress you so much, because, you know, there are people who just, you know, they're just constantly around you and helping you and supporting you. Yeah. It's massive. It's worth its weight in gold, you know, and I still, you know, it's worth its weight in gold. So, so some of all of those things, you know, so in the studies, and that's what happens when we have just Eurocentric form of studies, Eurocentric form of knowledge, you know, and when there's no representation, lack of diversity in those places, so there will be lack of ideas, that diversity of ideas will not be there. So again, we look at all of those things, and that's, the key problems, that we see concerning that. So when there is diversity of people, there will be diversity of ideas,
yes,
and that's what we're missing, we're missing in that. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Ebun Joseph, I have every confidence that with you and your powerful voice and mission and many others, many of the people that you have had in your panels and are working with, we will have a better Ireland, but everyone else has a role to play in this as well, including myself and the people within my sphere of influence.
Yeah.
So,
and sorry, just one key thing I think we kind of forgot, it's just around policies as well.
Yes.
It's about, the hate crime.
Yes.
That we don't have any laws, so again, so just really important that we, put laws in place, and this week now, the traveler community have been in the news again, a house that was going to be occupied by a traveler person burned down, and people are justifying, like, it just breaks your heart, that people are justifying that level of hate, and while the house that was burned down is not your own, everybody who is a minority sees that this is how we are the rejected ones. This is how we are the unaccepted ones. We are the unwelcome one. And that people are willing to burn down a house that is worth 330,000 just to stop somebody from living next to you. And one person was saying that, oh yeah, before you put somebody there, you should ask you should ask the neighbors. I'm like, seriously? When I got my house here, like, so it's only some group of people that need permission to live on certain places, because you and the others and everybody else just goes, either they rent the house or they buy their house. They don't ask permission from those on the street. So just that
we have a lot to work on. We have a lot to work on for sure.
Absolutely.
But we can only do our part and keep these issues on the agenda and raise them when they need to be, raise them all the time, but particularly when horrible incidences like that happen that are so harmful and shake, as you say, the safety of not just travelers, but anyone else who's not part of the majority dominant population. But Dr. Ebun Joseph, it's been a real pleasure for me to talk to you and to learn from you. I wish you really well with your book. I hope all, that there are great sales, and that people in HR positions and policy and politics and research read it and gain from it. Thank you for your time. This has been How to Talk Policy and Influence People with me, Jane Mulcahy. I also love your decolonized hair. You mentioned on Twitter. It's super. It's really cool. Thanks very much, Ebun.
Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye now.